I've been thinking a lot about darlings lately, the literary kind. A darling is anything in your story, a word, a character, a scene that you love, but that isn't in the best interest of your story. When someone says kill your darlings, they mean that cutting distracting elements from your story, even elements you love, makes your narrative stronger. For example, when I was writing the first draft of my novel, The Wolf's Name, I had initially outlined a different ending than the one that appears in the book. That ending worked in the outline stage, but as I drew closer to writing that ending, I realized it no longer fit. It would have ruined my main character's arc, and it would have ruined the themes that had developed in my book. So as much as I liked my initial ending, I changed it, and the story is better for it. One of my favorite stories ever is Avatar: The Last Airbender, but it isn't a perfect story. It has darlings of its own, one of which I believe caused problems for this scene. So I wanted to talk about why Aang spares Ozai's life, the Avatar state, and how, by not cutting one of their darlings, the writers were forced to use Deus Ex Machina, weakening the show. However, I realized that to talk about this and have it make sense, I needed to lay a lot of groundwork, because this is probably far more connected to this, and this, and this, and this, than you might think at first glance. I never imagined I'd end up doing this, but tie your bootlaces, fair viewers, because we're about to march into a ship war. Before I get started, I do need to mention Sneezy Review's video on Zutara. Aang and Ozai's battle is not a focus of her video, but to explain my points, I realized I need to cover much of the same material. I didn't want to just copy every single thing she said. Hopefully I'm coming at things from a little bit of a different angle given my background, but she is going to be much more thorough than me about the romantic plotlines, so if you find my video interesting, or if you feel that I'm putting too much weight into a single scene, I highly recommend her video. With that out of the way, if you don't understand what shipping is in a fandom context, pause the video now to have a lesson in terminology. One final disclaimer, I practice ship and let ship, so this video is not meant to shame anyone for their favorite pairing. Please keep enjoying them. But when it comes to good narrative and thematic structure, that has less to do with your feelings than it does about storycraft. And some feel that if any couple should have been canon at the end of the show, it should have been Zutara. It is now that I admit to you my deepest, most scandalous secret. I am, in fact, a Zutarian. Gasp! Before anyone comes after me, I actually went into the show with the understanding that Zuko and Katara were supposed to be canon. Once I realized the internet had lied to me, my expectation had already been set. I watched the rest of the show feeling anxious regarding the romances because I didn't know who the show wanted me to root for. When Katang was crowned, I decided my false Zutara expectations were responsible for my unease. But now that I know more about narrative structure and film language, I think my unease was actually caused by false promises the show itself had given me. The reason I bring up my background with Avatar is because I think it's indicative of the problem that I'm going to end up discussing in this video. Because I agree with my fellow Zutarians that making Zutara canon would have made for a more cohesive story. I won't suggest that Zuko and Katara were clearly in love with each other. Textually, there is nothing to suggest that their feelings go beyond friendship. However, the show often pointed toward a Zutara end through narrative structure and visuals. That is important to understand because in a visual medium, those visuals will always overshadow the text. Yet despite this depiction of Zutara, Katang was the end result. And this might seem surprising, but it is Katang that I speculate was the main reason for some of the poor writing choices for the finale. How on earth could this and this result in this? Let's take a look at how Katang and Zutara were handled and why I speculate that caused problems for the main plot by looking at 3 tactics that Avatar used to set up its romantic plots. Sometimes the foreshadowing in Avatar is subtle and clever, and sometimes not. Take this from the fortune teller in Book 1.
I see a great romance for you. The man you're going to marry.
Tell me more.
I can see that he's a very powerful bender.
Man, sometimes I forget what a powerful bender that kid is.
Wait, what did you just say?
Nothing, just that Aang is one powerful bender.
I suppose he is.
I'm mostly including this to show that I'm not pretending Katang was never hinted at. Clearly, this did end up foreshadowing their relationship. But given how blatantly heavy-handed this was, I actually took this to be a misdirect that was foreshadowing Katara's romance with another powerful bender. If this was initially meant to foreshadow Katang, it was uncharacteristically and aberrantly blunt for a show praised for its nuance and subtlety. But there's another episode in Book 2 that was probably meant to foreshadow important scenes later in the series, and that episode is...
Secret Talk!
The episode The Cave of Two Lovers has some excellent parallels between the tale of two earthbender lovers and the sweeping tale of romance between one of our favorite couples. Wait, you thought I was talking about Aang and Katara? Sorry, this is how the tale of two lovers goes.
These pictures tell their story. The villages were enemies, so they could not be together. But their love was strong, and they found a way. They built elaborate tunnels so that they could meet secretly. He died in the war between their two villages. Devastated, the woman unleashed a terrible display of her earthbending power. She could have destroyed them all. But instead, she declared the war over.
It seems that to foreshadow Katara and Zuko's meeting in prison, as well as their fight against Azula, the show may have used a legendary tale of two lovers. While as a writer I can attest that parallels like this can be written accidentally, if the visuals in the animation reinforce this interpretation, it gets harder to call this coincidence. Do the visuals reinforce this interpretation? Let's take a look. Full disclosure, I am not an animator. But apart from being a writer and artist, I have taken film and animation courses as part of my post-secondary education, and I also have a little experience working behind the scenes in theater. But just to make sure I wasn't reading too deeply into things, I also passed my notes through a friend of mine who does work in animation as a designer and a layout artist. Thanks, Natalie! One thing many Zutara fans will point out is that these two lovers are depicted in red and blue despite being earthbenders in a show that has only been very intentional when handing out exemptions to their color scheme for the nations. While Natalie told me that it is possible the two lovers may have been depicted in other colors simply to make them stand out from the green background, red making the most sense in that context, she does find it curious that the other would then be in blue, and it leaves her with questions. Detractors will point out that the two lovers are also depicted in yellow and blue. That's a good point, and I'm also curious about why this person is randomly holding a branch. Does this image hint at a Zuko, Aang, Katara love triangle? Is the person in yellow supposed to be Aang, this branch a symbolic representation of his staff? Or maybe this is still supposed to be Zuko, who wears yellower tones when he's imprisoned with Katara. Maybe this branch is more of a Western proverbial olive branch like the one Zuko extends and then retracts in the episode The Crossroads of Destiny. Or is it neither of those things and the choice of colors truly was just to make the character stand out from the background? I don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. Taken alone, it's hard to say. Regardless, it does seem very odd to me for the animators to break from their usually strict color scheme. Another point many Zutarians will bring up is the similar framing of shots between the Cave of Two Lovers episode and the Crossroads of Destiny where Zuko and Katara end up imprisoned together. Natalie suggested, and I agree, that these alone don't hold much weight, as most of these shots are very common framings one would expect to see over and over again. One possible exemption being this shot. Katara and the man in blue occupy the right of the frame, but They're just standing, and there's nothing special about that. Zuko and the woman in red, however, are both kneeling. Combined with the characters in blue, this is not a framing I would expect to see duplicated especially often. Yes, this show is inspired by a lot of Eastern philosophy and media, and kneeling is much more common in many East Asian cultures. But as someone who has done hours of kneeling for martial arts, I find this particular kneeling pose a little unexpected. And both characters kneel the same way, hunched forward a bit awkwardly, their hands on their thighs, both facing the one in blue. Then consider the setting. These crystals in the bottom right could visually substitute for the hill the man stands on, and this cluster of crystals in the background has similar framing to this mountain. And this outcropping of rock in the stem of crystals here is visually similar to this rise and tree. Even the tree itself, as well as the one in this shot, while a common tree in East Asian art and aesthetics, immediately reminds me of this tree from Zuko's flashbacks. Take all of that together, and I'm at least raising an eyebrow at this point. Honestly, I don't think anything in The Tale of Two Lovers completely works as a one-to-one copy of a single plotline or relationship. Some images from the story are hard to see as anything but foreshadowing, such as this shot of the woman unleashing her power after the death of her lover, matching the rock chimneys and comet we see in Aang's final battle. But Aang hasn't just lost his lover, so while the visuals match, the tale itself does not. So, no, it's not a one-to-one copy. But the couple the tale fits best is Zuko and Katara, and we still have one more, harder-to-ignore visual cue that connects Zuko and Katara to the Tale of Lovers. A cue that, once again, calls into question why the show would frame these two in a romantic context, and it also makes the colors and shots of the lovers feel intentional. That visual cue is that Ba Sing Se has normal prison cells that we've seen in other episodes, including the Crossroads of Destiny episode, yet Zuko and Katara are imprisoned together in a suspiciously too loversy cave with romantic glowing crystals. For some reason. When you see a visual medium use a completely new setting when an already designed one could have been reused, such as these already established prison cells in Ba Sing Se, you have to ask yourself why they're doing that. Because it costs time and resources to design that new setting. The cave Zuko and Katara are imprisoned in is one we've never seen before and never see again, so what was the narrative purpose for it? Now that you're asking the right questions, that brings us to another tactic Avatar used to build up the romance arcs. Avatar frequently juxtaposes Aang and Zuko, their backstories, their concepts of honor, their redemption arcs, but sometimes that juxtaposition involves their relationships with Katara. For a show that had Katara end up with Aang, though, it's almost always Zuko who's depicted as having a more mature, supportive, and especially equal partnership with Katara, even though they start as enemies, and the show ultimately decided that their relationship was platonic. Oopsies! One of the more blatant examples of this is the episode The Southern Raiders. Every step Zuko takes, of which there are several, is about trying to understand Katara and what he can do to help her heal on her terms. However, tells Katara what she needs to do and claims he understands her despite taking no steps to understand.
Katara, you sound like Jet.
Whether or not you agree with Aang's philosophy of forgiveness, the episode has its own answer. which is to bring Zuko and Katara closer together, a closeness that gets tighter with each new episode, at the same time that it drives Katara and Aang further apart. A distance that only grows with each new episode and is never resolved on screen until this moment, proving that the writers may have taken the phrase "kiss it better" a little too seriously. But let's go back to the Crossroads of Destiny, because the most likely reason Zuko and Katara were placed in a cavern prison was to visually connect this scene not only with the tale from the Cave of Two Lovers, but also with other scenes in the episode. In her analysis of these episodes, Sneezy pointed out some juxtaposition the show uses that I found really interesting. In the Cave of Two Lovers, Aang and Katara share, or potentially share, a physically intimate moment, but an emotionally distant one. Not only are Aang and Katara not on the same page before the potential kiss, but afterward, Katara eagerly runs off the moment she sees the way out. Physical intimacy, emotional distance. In the same episode, a girl named Song attempts to make both an emotional and a slight physical connection with Zuko, and his reaction is,
Whoa, no touchy. No touchy. No touch.
While he's clearly affected by Song sharing her trauma with him, he does not reciprocate. So here we have emotional and physical distance. In the Crossroads of Destiny, however, once again, a girl tries to touch Zuko's scar. And this time, he lets her. But it's only a slight physical connection. What's far more important than that is the moment of emotional intimacy Katara and Zuko experience. Katara opens up about her trauma in a way she never really has before. And for the first time, Zuko reciprocates. He shows sympathy, and both of them share trauma that is central to their character arcs and receive support from the other in ways they haven't from their canonical love interests. While Zuko and Katara definitely both still have growing to do, this episode depicts their relationship as special. As Katara leaves, unlike when she ran from Aang in the Cave of Two Lovers, this time she looks back. She and Zuko have made an emotional connection. Hearing Sneezy frame these scenes this way reminded me of John Green talking about his novel Looking for Alaska. When some parents attempted to get the book banned from schools because it included a sex scene, the reason Green gave for including the scene has always stuck with me. He explained that he purposefully juxtaposed a scene that had sex but no emotional intimacy with another scene that had emotional connection with no sex. And he did that specifically to show the importance of that emotional connection. Not that Aang and Katara's theoretical kiss is as physically intimate as sex, but I can't help but think of Green's explanation when I see these two scenes. Physical intimacy without emotional connection with little physical intimacy, and how important that emotional connection is. This reading of Katang versus Zutara also works for Maiko. Mei is pleased enough to have a physical connection with Zuko, but when it comes to emotional connection, she's not interested.
I just asked if you were cold. I didn't ask for your whole life story.
It's no wonder he gets jealous in the beach. Sure, his behavior is not ideal, but Mei has given him no reason to feel secure in their relationship. When we see Zuko and Katara make an emotional connection that they do not make with Aang or Mei, it's hard not to develop certain hopes for them. Usually the show uses scenes like this intentionally. Let me give you a non-romantic example. In Just Right's review of the Last Airbender film, he discusses the Blue Spirit episode and how the live-action movies seemed to miss the entire point of it. The point of the original is to show the viewer how well Aang and Zuko could work together if only they fought on the same side. Aang and Zuko are balanced, they save each other's life an equal number of times, and they're shown trusting each other's judgment. Even though Zuko knows he's working with his enemy, and as far as Aang knows, he just met this cosplaying rando. The point of this episode is to make us hope for this, because now we know how amazing they'd be as allies. So when Aang asks Zuko if he thinks they could have been friends, and Zuko responds by firebending at him, it's sad. Zuko isn't ready to be friends. I feel like the Crossroads of Destiny is Zuko and Katara's The Blue Spirit episode. Structurally speaking, these two episodes are identical. We see the reasons Zuko and Katara could work well together, the reasons they balance each other, how they show trust of each other despite being enemies. The point of an episode like this should be to make us hope for this, and maybe a little of this. Because if they're this good as enemies, we know how amazing Zuko and Katara could be as a couple. So when Zuko and Katara have this exchange,
I thought you had changed!
I have changed.
And Zuko firebends at her, it's sad. Zuko isn't ready for what the episode showed us they could have. And there's another comparison to be made here, because this battle in the Crossroads of Destiny, where Zuko betrays Katara and joins Azula, is meant to be compared to the finale, where this time Zuko fights alongside Katara against Azula to show how his character has changed. In both scenes, Azula strikes someone down with her lightning, and Katara heals them. And I found the film language and Katara's reaction in both scenes interesting. In the Crossroads of Destiny, it's Aang who is struck down. It happens suddenly. We don't see it coming, which means that the audience is shocked, but that they don't have an emotional buildup before or during the attack. Immediately after the lightning strike, the camera focuses close on Azula, not on Katara. The focus of this scene is on Aang blocking his chakra and not really on any emotional impact on Katara. While we do get one close-up of Katara's reaction, it happens 6 shots after Aang is struck. There's 12 seconds between the strike and Katara's reaction. She's obviously upset and tearful, but the rest of the shots of Katara are mostly from a distance, which in turn lends the viewer emotional distance from her. We also get this shot of her cradling Aang. The pose is nearly identical to the famous Pietà of Mary cradling Jesus' body after his death. This lends this scene appropriate Savior of the World vibes shortly before Aang's resurrection, but it also lends the scene very mother-son vibes, a parent-child dynamic between Katara and Aang that exists for most of the show.
What do you think, Aang? Do I act like a mom?
Well,
Stop rubbing your eye and speak clearly when you talk.
Yes, ma'am.
Later, when Katara attempts to heal Aang, she has a little moisture in her eyes, but once Aang is revived, though joyful, Katara is now dry-eyed. Compare all of that to how the scene plays out in the final episodes. While the scene with Aang focused on his connection to the Avatar state rather than his connection to Katara, the reversal of that battle in the finale is heavily romantically coded. Where the attack on Aang was a surprise, this time Azula's attack is telegraphed before it happens, allowing the viewer a moment to dread what's coming. The strike itself is played in slow motion to heighten the emotional effect. Then, immediately before and after Zuko is hit by lightning, the focus of the camera is all Katara. We get more close-ups of her than we did when Aang was struck, and these close-ups are tighter, more emotionally driven, and we don't have to wait 12 seconds to see them. There's first an extreme close-up of her reaction before Zuko is hit, an over-the-shoulder shot the moment he's hit that shows us what she's seeing, and then another close-up of her reaction. We then get a shot of dramatic lightning and a few shots of Zuko in pain before we have yet another shot of Katara calling out for Zuko. Later, we even get scenes of them reaching out for each other as they struggle to come to the other's aid. Where the camera gave Katara emotional distance after the attack on Aang, now the camera is all about that emotion. What's more, where she was joyful but dry-eyed after reviving Aang, Katara openly sheds tears of joy when she revives Zuko. If we're supposed to be rooting for Katang, These are some very weird creative decisions. So what we have are several episodes where the show uses narrative structure and film language to show how Katara has a unique bond with Zuko and how they work well together. Yet the Katang scenes don't really do that. They have a beautiful friendship, sure, but theirs is much more of that parent-child relationship than one of equal partners. The only reason I'd watch this and hope for this is because Aang hopes for it. There are tons of romances we root for simply because one of the characters wants it, but usually those stories don't also contain a viable romantic alternative. When you compare Katara and Aang's parent-child relationship, one in which she often offers emotional support but usually receives little to none back, when you compare that to the scenes explicitly depicting Zuko offering Katara emotional support on equal footing, Katang starts to feel like awarding a gold medal to second place. But there's more juxtaposition between the romantic arcs happening in Book 2, because immediately before Zuko and Katara are having their heart-to-heart in prison, Aang is attempting to master the Avatar state in the episode The Guru. In effect, right before Zuko and Katara first make that all-important emotional connection, Aang learns that his one-sided attachment to Katara is a capital P problem. The Guru introduces major internal conflict for Aang, and that's actually a good thing. We don't like to see characters get new special powers without earning them first, and we especially like to see characters overcoming internal struggles to earn their narrative right to wield those new powers. Aang comes into the show already having mastered airbending, but for each new element he must learn to wield, we see him work through mostly internal struggles to earn his right to use the other elements. When it comes to the Avatar state, an ability more powerful than his other bending abilities combined, literally, his struggle to earn the right to use that ability needs to be proportionately more difficult. Turning Aang's attachment to Katara, an attachment the show has built into one of Aang's defining traits, into the obstacle he must overcome to earn the Avatar state is perhaps the best choice the writers could have made, for several reasons. But to discuss those reasons, we first have to discuss the third tactic I wanted to bring up that Avatar uses to set up the romance plots. The romance subplots in Avatar: The Last Airbender may seem at first glance like they're merely interesting side quests, but most of the romance arcs are actually weaved expertly with the character arcs of the main cast, lending those character arcs more depth and nuance. For the most part, this is done incredibly well, at least until those arcs start to get derailed in Book 3. We already discussed the Crossroads of Destiny and how Zuko and Katara open up about trauma central to their arcs. This isn't only important because it shows they give and receive support, it's also important because it indicates that Katara and Zuko are narratively significant in each other's arcs in ways other characters aren't. In Katara's case, Aang's love of her is initially set up not as true love, but as an idealization. He ignores hints that she has a darker side and never fully sees the whole Katara.
Aang, this is all my fault.
No, Katara, it isn't.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Zuko, on the other hand, not only gets to see Katara as a whole person, he not only gets to see her dark side, he's the one who helps her through it. The Southern Raiders is a crucial episode in Katara's arc, and it's Zuko, not Aang, who goes on the journey with her. A large part of Katara's arc is about overcoming the trauma of her mother's murder and learning to see the people she views as both allies and enemies in shades of gray. It's about learning one of the show's main themes, that no nation nor person is entirely evil nor entirely good. Thematically speaking, developing a romance with one of the grayest characters on the show would only serve to strengthen Katara's arc. So it's fitting that both times Katara truly opens up about this trauma, it's to Zuko. And it's also fitting that during the most important scenes of her arc, it's once again Zuko who supports her. This means that thematically and structurally, Zuko is more important to Katara's character development than her canonical love interest. The reverse is also true. Zuko's character arc is largely about learning that true honor is not about receiving respect from others, but about showing it to others. A romance arc with someone he betrayed would only serve to strengthen the lesson of Zuko's arc. And while Uncle Iroh is undeniably the most important character in Zuko's arc, when Iroh isn't there, it's Katara who fills in for some of the biggest plot points in Zuko's journey. When Zuko betrays Iroh in the Crossroads of Destiny, he betrays Katara too. She's present, offering him courage before his attempt to atone for that betrayal and reunite with Iroh. And in the reversal of the battle that played out in the Crossroads of Destiny, though Katara has forgiven him for his betrayal and choice that allowed for Azula to strike Aang dead with lightning, to properly atone himself for the narrative and to prove his change in character, Zuko now must symbolically die to protect Katara from Azula's lightning. And as a tiny tangent, Azula is a genius manipulator. Sure, she's unraveling a little. Or a lot in the final episodes, but I really don't think that's changed her understanding of how to manipulate people. But Azula is very skilled at pinpointing a person's weakness. How she manipulates her soldiers is very different than how she manipulates her mother, Ty Lee, or Sokka. Interestingly, whenever Azula gets backed into a corner by Zuko, she attacks someone she knows he cares for. That's how she manipulates him.
See, I told you it would work.
Here, it's Iroh, and here, it's Katara. Yes, Katara was literally the only person Azula could attack in this scene, but the point is the writers placed her in that scene to be attacked so that Azula could manipulate Zuko. Katara is critical to Zuko's arc. Also, as another tiny little side note, after she's attacked Zuko, Azula attempts to manipulate Katara by taunting her about Zuko.
I'd really rather our family physician look after little Zuzu if you don't mind.
But the romances that Zuko and Katara canonically end up in, while they begin as useful and meaningful character exploration, they actually end up detracting from somebody's arc by the end of the story. First, let's discuss Maiko. Zuko's return to the Fire Nation is about getting everything he thought he wanted, only to realize what he actually wanted was never on the table. It's meant to be the darkest part of his arc, and he's not meant to have a light in this darkness. It's why he's cut off from Uncle Iroh. Zuko's relationship with Mai, therefore, is symptomatic of everything that's wrong with his return to the Fire Nation. Much like he struggled ineffectively to get his father's affection, so too does he struggle to connect emotionally with Mai. The more he tries to appeal to her, the more destructive he gets, the deeper into the darkness he goes. This is beautifully handled. And it's exactly this reason the show should never have ended with Mai and Zuko together. But let's get back to Aang and how his relationship with Katara screws up his arc. As I already mentioned, the episode The Guru introduces some internal conflict for Aang to overcome to earn his right to the Avatar state. And making Katara the source of his internal conflict is the perfect choice. First, Aang is determined to fulfill his responsibilities as Avatar, specifically because running away from his responsibility is what he believes allowed the Fire Nation's imperialist war in the first place. This means that one of the things Aang holds most dear, his idealization of Katara, is now in direct opposition to his path toward redemption. This is good writing. This is literally the kind of internal conflict most writers are dying to come up with in their stories. Second, after the destruction of his people, Aang understandably feels a responsibility to carry on their traditions. We see this attachment to his culture through his memories of Gyatso, his anger toward those who he viewed as disrespecting an air temple, his attachment to Momo and Appa as all that connect him to his past, and even in his sticking to his vegetarian diet. And that's something that I can tell you is pretty hard to do without starving while traveling, especially while traveling with meat eaters and through places where vegetarian options are scarce.
You guys go ahead. I'll just get some lettuce out of the garbage.
But there's something else about Aang's culture these shows slides discreetly into a line of dialogue here or there.
But the monks taught me that I had to detach myself from the world so my spirit could be free.
While Avatar Youngchun tells Aang that he can never fully detach from the world due to his responsibility toward it, Aang's attachment to Katara nevertheless not only stands in the way of his responsibility as Avatar, but also in his desire to cling to Airbender spirituality and tradition. To use Aang's attachment to Katara as the source of his internal conflict regarding the Avatar state, his redemption, and his cultural identity is a fantastic choice. Which is why it's disappointing that all of this fascinating internal struggle that could have made for a redemption arc as praised as Zuko's gets left unresolved. In the Guru episode, despite Aang having never received indication that Katara returns his feelings, something you'd hope he'd take into consideration, considering it would be pretty terrible to potentially sacrifice the world's future all to hold on to attachments that may never be returned, but Aang decides giving up his attachment to Katara is too high of a price to pay to master the Avatar state. Not only does he not take Katara's feelings into account, not only does he fail to master the Avatar state, Book 2 ends with Aang unable to use the Avatar state at all. I'm not saying that this was the wrong way for the season to end. I think an internal struggle of that magnitude should happen over the course of a whole season, and we should see some regression here and there before Aang is truly ready to overcome this struggle. The only problem is this issue is never resolved later in the show either. There's a line of dialogue from Uncle Iroh stating that power is overrated, but this line of dialogue doesn't actually resolve the problem. And while Iroh is a man of much wisdom,
Are you so busy fighting you cannot see your own ship has set sail?
We have no time for your proverbs, Uncle.
in this case, he's probably too close to the story to realize the narrative actually needs Aang to have that power. The story, in order to be properly told, needs Aang to have the Avatar state. Yes, finally, at long last, we are going to talk about Aang and Ozai. There has been some debate in the fan community about whether Aang sparing Ozai was the right choice, but based on the character arcs and themes set for the show, Ozai being shown mercy in the final episode is the whole point. The show has many themes, and for several of them, it's important for Aang to spare the Fire Lord in the finale. But let's focus on the same thematic reason I focused on in another Avatar video I made, the nature of honor. If you watched that video, you may remember this graphic. To explore the concept of honor, Aang and each of the three main antagonists of the show have a different definition of honor, allowing the story to have a broader discussion on it. As a quick recap of my other video, Aang's interpretation of honor is do no harm, which is noble but often leads to his flaw of running away from conflict altogether, resulting in his greatest regret and in his motivation to redeem himself through defeating Ozai. Because of this, Aang's arc is partly about learning to stand his ground and step into his role as Avatar, rather than run away. This comes up in the final episodes when Aang believes his past lives are telling him to kill the Fire Lord. Interestingly, none of them actually say that. I mean, hands down, Kyoshi would tell him to kill the Fire Lord.
Technically, he fell to his own doom because he was too stubborn to get out of the way.
Personally, I don't really see the difference.
But that isn't actually what she told him to do. And it's not what any of his past lives tell him to do.
I offer you this wisdom, Aang. You must be decisive.
Only justice will bring peace.
You must actively shape your own destiny and the destiny of the world.
Each of his past lives gave advice that ended up being central to how Aang defeated Ozai and to the themes of Aang's character arc. He was decisive and stood his ground. He brought a form of justice against the Fire Lord and showed a renewed understanding of do no harm. He actively shaped the destiny of the world by removing a tyrannical warmongerer from power. But there was one more bit of advice Aang heard.
Selfless duty calls you to sacrifice your own spiritual needs and do whatever it takes to protect the world.
Even in subsequent watchings of Avatar, this piece of advice from Yongchen never made sense to me, because it's the only advice Aang is given that didn't fit with his actions. But I'm gonna stick a pin in this for a minute, because the point I'm trying to make is that despite believing everyone is urging him to kill the Fire Lord, Aang spares his life. Sparing the Fire Lord's life proves that Aang has learned his lesson about standing his ground and shows he's gained a more accurate understanding of do no harm. However, sparing the Fire Lord's life is also important for Ozai's arc. What arc, you ask? Ozai didn't have an arc. Ozai doesn't have an arc in the sense that he learns something and changes. He remains a pretty static character. But he was presented with the same chance for an arc that others were. He simply failed every beat of his arc. Ozai's interpretation of honor is might makes right, placing him in direct opposition to Aang's do no harm. Ozai's failed arc is about learning that his interpretation of honor is wrong and that mercy is not weakness. It's for this reason Ozai's inciting incident is when a young Zuko speaks out in the war room specifically in favor of mercy. If Aang had killed Ozai, it would have botched not only Aang's arc, but also Ozai's. It would have twisted the themes of the story. It's important for Ozai to be defeated through an act of mercy, to have Ozai's might makes right philosophy overthrown by a philosophy of mercy. So yeah, unless a lot about the show that brought us to this moment was fundamentally changed, Ozai needed to be spared in the final episode. However, as well done as most of this was, there was part of Aang's defeat of Ozai that wasn't handled well, and that's the issue of Aang regaining his ability to use the Avatar state through Deus Ex Machina. To hammer home Ozai's lesson of mercy isn't weakness, it's important for Aang to readily have the option to not choose mercy, but to choose mercy anyway. Otherwise, his choice is meaningless. He needed to have the option to adopt Ozai's might makes right approach and to choose not to. Aang needed the Avatar state in the finale as much as he needed to choose not to use it to kill Ozai. But the writers went into the finale with the teensy-weensy problem of having taken Aang's ability to use the Avatar state away, forcing them to resort to Deus Ex Machina to give Aang the Avatar state back in time for him to defeat the Fire Lord. Now I want to go back to Yongchen's advice to Aang.
Selfless duty calls you to sacrifice your own spiritual needs and do whatever it takes to protect the world.
Maybe I'm just missing it, but I don't see how this advice fits with Aang's actions, because Aang never has to sacrifice anything in the finale. If Aang had given up his attachment to Katara as a way to unblock his chakra and earn the Avatar state, that would have been a form of spiritual sacrifice. It would have made Yongchen's advice make sense. Make it make sense! What's more, having Aang give up his attachment to Katara would have had other benefits for the show. It would have meant that not only would the tale of two earthbender lovers have fit Zuko and Katara exceptionally well, but another interpretation of the tale would have worked just as well for Aang, lending this tale of lovers layer upon layer upon layer of meaning. If Aang had given up his attachment to Katara to earn the Avatar state just before his battle with Ozai, symbolically, Katara could have been the love that died in the war, meaning that this scene would not only visually apply to Aang's final battle, but so would the tale itself. By having Aang refuse to engage with the internal conflict the writer set up in the episode The Guru, by having Aang refuse to resolve his idealization of Katara, he is once again running away from his responsibilities as Avatar, showing a regression in his arc that is never overcome by the end. Aang should come to a realization that his duty as Avatar demands he master the Avatar state. He should think of the rift that's formed between him and Katara and realize he's attached to an idealization of her. He should earn his right to use the Avatar state by making deliberate character changes, not by being the lucky benefactor of Deus Ex Machina. By running away and not facing the Guru's lesson head-on in any episode in the show, it robs Aang of the opportunity for a complete arc and forces the writers into a corner where they had little choice but to use bad writing to get back out. Worse still, returning the Avatar state to Aang through Deus Ex Machina and allowing him to get together with Katara in the end means that Aang is narratively rewarded for running away. He's rewarded for ignoring the purpose of his arc. My speculation for why the writers didn't resolve Aang's internal conflict is that someone behind the scenes wanted Katang to be endgame. It's hard to do that and have it feel satisfying if you devote a whole side quest to all the reasons why Katang is bad for the world, actually. So they simply didn't follow through on that plotline. They refused to kill their darling. I'm not pointing my finger directly at Michael Dante DiMartino or Brian Konietzko, as I don't know if either one of them are the ones who made that final decision. But they have mentioned their soft spot for Katang, and they have at times even poked fun at Zutarians, claiming that Zutara was simply dark and intriguing and would never have worked out, despite their own show depicting that that wasn't true. Zuko and Katara were not just dark and intriguing, but they were eventually healthier than the relationships they actually ended up in. Zuko ends up in a toxic relationship, and Katara and Aang are ignoring some pretty big ideological differences in their relationship. But we're supposed to be happy about this for some reason. It's not that there was no way to make Katang work if they'd truly been set on that idea, and avoided going down certain roads, but much like how the ending I'd planned for my novel no longer made sense by the end, the journey of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the roads it actually went down, took it to a place where the Katang ending no longer worked. Making Katang make sense would have required undoing so much of what the show set up, so much of what the show became at its heart. Because Aang may be the main character of the show, but the heart of the show is Zuko. This is why, as others before me have pointed out, Aang's battle against Ozai is epic, but not especially emotional. Yet Zuko has a battle with Azula that, although it's also epic, is almost entirely about emotion. And the person who's with him, supporting him through his arc the way he supported her through hers, is Katara, another character one might describe as the heart. Not the heart of the show, maybe, but the heart of the gang. So it's strange to me that these characters, these two hearts, end up with other people. Before I end the video, I wanted to bring up one final point Sneezy makes in hers, so I'll credit to her for this. But the point that she makes is that the one thing Zutara does that neither Katang nor Maiko can do is give narrative relevance to the other ships. Katang and Maiko would need to be explored on screen to show why Zuko and Katara got from each other what they couldn't from Aang or Mai. Zutara lends relevance to showing Katang and Maiko scenes on screen, but having Katang be canon does not do the same for Zutara. All it does is render the Zutara scenes as mere ship bait. Some potentially amazing foreshadowing, juxtaposition, and thematic relevance ends up becoming some of the worst writing in the show because it leads nowhere. It does nothing. There's no payoff, and it leaves people confused about what messages the show is trying to send, as I was when I first watched the show. Avatar: The Last Airbender is still my favorite thing ever, and the Katang ending won't change that. I still consider this show to be among one of the most effectively written tales out there. And to be honest, part of me even likes noticing the show's flaws, because it takes the show off that pedestal of perfection and makes it attainable. It makes me realize that maybe one day, maybe, just maybe, I could also write something as dear to people's hearts as Avatar is to mine. Avatar has taught me a lot about life and storytelling. From Zuko, I learned the importance of mistakes. From Katara, I learned compassion. From Katang, I learned that just because you love your darlings doesn't mean that they're good for your story. Ironically, whomever was responsible for the choice to make Katang endgame, they could have learned a lesson from Guru Patik themselves. Just as Aang was unable to give up his attachment to Katara and properly fulfill his responsibility as Avatar, by refusing to give up their attachment to Katang, the writers were unable to properly fulfill their responsibility to the world of Avatar, their responsibility to make the story cohesive and the best it could be. So if you truly love your story and want the best for it, then remember Guru Patik's lesson. Remember, sometimes you may need to spare your villain, but you must always kill your darlings.